Well, good morning, Cornerstone. With coronavirus back on the rise, COVID going back up again, we are reintroducing our micro sermon series for YouTube. And partly this is just due to the fact that it's a challenge to get really good quality audio with the live stream options that we have available. We're looking at getting that corrected. But in the interim, I'm going to begin doing these videos again in hopes to keep folks connected, both to Cornerstone and to each other. We'll be having some more announcements about that in the near future. In the meantime, let's go ahead and get into our sermon for today. Proverbs chapter 9. It's the last of our series on the book of Proverbs, just before we go into the holiday season. And it's in chapter 9. So if you want to turn with me there today, we're actually going to be taking the entire book, the entire chapter, and going through it. But before we get into that, we all know that fake news has become an expression and a term that has become part of our everyday lives and existences. And I wanted to give you an example of how that played itself out in our own community this week. This Thursday, we had a large fire here in the valley. There was a hotel on fire in the downtown area. Many of you probably saw it on one of the local news stations. And what was reported by multiple sources, and I saw this. I won't cite every single source, but I saw that 11 people were rescued, and that one firefighter was injured. You can look it up. You can Google it. You'll find it quickly, but from my inside source, my understanding is that in fact, the articles were very specific. It said 11 people had to be rescued from a balcony by a ladder. But what I understand from eyewitness accounts is that only one person was rescued from a balcony. And that point in fact, there probably wasn't like imminent danger going on. It wasn't like a fire was backdrafting out the patio door as they were whisked out of danger. That it was more of a routine kind of evacuation, that 10 of those people just were escorted out the hallways. And that the firefighter that was actually hurt was something like they rolled an ankle. It wasn't even a burn. Now, why am I bringing this up? What does this have to do with fake news? And what in the world does this have to do with Proverbs chapter 9? Today, we're going to look at two people who are competing for our energy, our attention, and are going to try to convince us of something. And the first person is Lady Wisdom, and the second is Lady Folly. And they're going to prepare a meal. They're going to prepare a feast, and they're going to be rivals of one another. They're both competing for you, for your thoughts, for your life, for your actions. They want a response, and they are making their appeal to you. And the question that you have to wrestle is, okay, what am I going to do with that? What am I going to choose? And today, that question is in a world that's super complicated, where fake news kind of makes things difficult for us to be able to know who to trust. Let's make it a little simpler. Let's just boil it down. Let's just recognize that at the end of the day, there are two choices: Lady Wisdom, Lady Folly. And that following Lady Wisdom leads us into life, and that following Lady Folly leads us to death. And both those things are competing for your attention today. So let's begin. Let's start this out by getting into the word. Again, Proverbs chapter 9, and it begins in verse 1. It says this: Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. That first 6 verses, the conclusion is that she wants you to live. Lady Wisdom is calling out, and her ultimate goal is to bring goodness and life. Now, there's a couple things. Let's just break this down a little bit, verse by verse. That first phrase, that may sound a little bit familiar in verse 1, that Lady Wisdom has hewn out her 7 pillars. Now, scholars have done all kinds of work and tried to make something out of that. It's really been inconclusive. Some people think that that's symbolic, especially many early church fathers try to go, well, it's the apostles and the prophets and the disciples, and they try to come up with the number of 7. And some people believe that maybe it represents the 7 days of creation, or the 7, the sun, moon is like 7 celestial bodies, the sun, moon, and the 5 known planets from that day and age. We probably hear it and we're like, 7 pillars of wisdom. Wasn't that a book or something? Which it was, and it was eventually made into a movie called Lawrence of Arabia. But really what we want to take away here is that Lady Wisdom is dwelling in a palace, that she has the wherewithal, she has the means, she has the stability, she has the wealth and the intelligence to build something that requires 7 pillars. We know now from archaeological studies that Sennacherib, who attacked Jerusalem just a few generations from Solomon's time, he actually built a palace with 7 pillars. Like, this is a sign of wealth and being regal and having incredible power and esteem. And that is where she dwells. She has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. Wisdom is somebody who is prepared, who is regal. And she is, verse 2, she shows us that she is preparing something. It says, she has prepared her food, mixed her wine, she has set her table. That's a really interesting selection of things. Prepared her food, mixed her wine, and set her table. She is coming with good hospitality in mind. Now, some of you have experienced this. What does it look like to go to a place and find a mint on your pillow? Or find that the host, that the home you're living at, or the place that you're staying at, you come in the door and they already have a cool drink waiting for you, or they already know something that you have a preference toward or for. That is good hospitality, and that is the kind of person that Wisdom is. She knows you. She's prepared for you. She has this great palace, but she also is seeking you, and she is ready for you. That's the kind of host that she is. Now, the next selection is really fabulous. This selection about how she is going out. She sent her maidens. She calls out from the top, the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, whoever is simple, come to me. And this may remind you, if you're familiar with the Proverbs, of just turn back one page to chapter 8. In the first 3 verses of chapter 8, it says, does not wisdom call, and understanding lift up her voice? On the top of the heights, beside the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening of the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out. And the wonderful thing about this is that this appeal is going out so broadly. And oftentimes when we think about religion, or we think about, honestly, our faith, it can kind of get cloistered inside of our churches and our temples, or teaching and all that kind of stuff can become lost in an academic setting, on a campus or at a school classroom setting. Or some of you may have a picture of religious leaders who are these gurus who stand or sit up on a hill, and you have to go seek them out. You have to journey there and adventure, and that part of the learning is the travel. That's not what Wisdom is doing at all. She is calling out to the simple ones. There's a very low bar for entry. This is an entry level position. This is I love this lyric by one of my favorite bands. These are lowercase people. These are These are people. She is making her appeal to each and every one of us. She is going into the high places of the city, the street corners, the gates. These are the places of commerce. These are the places of society. These are the places where everybody hangs out. And if you remember, Jesus tells a parable that has some similarities in it, this parable of the great banquet. We find it in Luke 14, where this man prepares a feast and he says, go get my guests. And what is understood is that these are family and friends. And the servant comes back and he says, I've invited the guests, but some of them made excuses and there's still space at the table. And the master sends out his servants again and goes, go to the poor, go to the broken, go to the wayward places. And then he sends them out again. They come back and say, there's still room. He sends them out again and he says, go to the byways, go to the highways, go to the rural areas, go to Cuna, go to Twin Falls, go wherever you need to go. Go to Idaho City, go to Sweet Ola. You go find those people who are missing. That is the brevity of the call of wisdom. Wisdom is not something that is intended just for people with high IQs. Wisdom is not just intended for people with like the secret sauce or the password or those kind of things. Like it's not because you wear a certain set of clothes. Wisdom is a call to everyone. And what's even more, I love this illustration. One commentator points out that it's wisdom's servants who go out and speak. Wisdom's servants, it says, verse 3, she sent out her maidens, but it is she who calls. You can have a lot of different people in your life who are crying out the wisdom, the truth of the Bible, in pushing it back into your existence. It may be a different voice than Lady Wisdom herself, but it is still Lady Wisdom calling. In other words, you may not get to hear this voice from heaven, this light shining down on you and say, John, thou shalt go forth into, but it's parents, it's Sunday school teachers, it's aunts and uncles that you trust. And anytime you look at the words that they are speaking and you can square those words with the words of Scripture, you can step back and you can say, oh my goodness, that is Lady Wisdom crying out to me, crying out to the place that I am at. Are we willing to listen to that? And finally, her appeal in verse 6 is key, and it's really important that we see this. Verse 6 of chapter 9 says, forsake your folly and live. Proceed in the way of understanding. There's a catch. You can come to the table as simple. You can come with a very low bar for entry, but something is being asked of the simple, and that is that they forsake their folly and step into life. There is a catch. Wisdom is going to speak, and wisdom expects the simple to listen and to obey. Now, let's jump into the next section. Keep all that in mind. Keep in mind that Lady Wisdom, the key takeaway is Lady Wisdom is inviting us into life. That's the key takeaway. And that life requires something. It requires us forsaking our following and following after her good direction. The next part is kind of interesting. The next part, different folks over the years have studied this and they've been like, I'm not even sure this is supposed to be here. Like there's 6 verses at the beginning and they are almost exactly mirrored with the 6 verses at the end. There's a symmetry in this passage from the first 6 verses and the last 6 verses. And right plopped down in the middle of those are 6 other verses that don't seem to have a direct connection to Lady Wisdom or Lady Folly. Now, you could view this as an intermission in our story, but I think it's something more, and I think it's this. I'm going to read a commentator to you. These 6 verses allow the chapter to end with a shattering climax. Its content corrects the impression that men are saved or lost merely through an isolated, impulsive decision. The choice is seen as ripening into character and so into destiny. In other words, what this author or this commentator is suggesting is this. These verses are there to recognize that character takes time to develop and that wisdom is calling out. She's crying out, but it's not like you're like, oh, hi, okay, hey, wisdom, I'll do what you say. And then it's done. Oh, that's my choice. It's all over. I am now wise. I am no longer simple. I am now wise. But that there is character development that takes place over time. And we've seen this. We've seen people who are wise, who walk along the path for a long time, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and suddenly their marriage falls apart. Suddenly they lose their faith. Suddenly they stop listening to the cry of wisdom and they listen. They turn their head and they follow after Lady Folly. This is not an isolated thing. This is a lifelong commitment. And that's what these 7 verses give us an opportunity to do. It gives us an opportunity to examine our own lives, to take us, a doctor would say, hey, you need to take a self-examination every once in a while, get on the scale, kind of recognize, maybe I'm not getting as healthy in these areas. This is our opportunity. Let's read these middle 6 verses. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself. He who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. So do not reprove a scoffer or he will hate you. Reprove the wise man and he will love you. Self-examination time. Question. Can you accept reproof or not? If you can, wisdom is saying you're on the right path. If you cannot, you may not be. Verse 9, give instruction to the wise man, he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man, he will increase his learning. And here's the motto. This is actually the bookend to the first section of Proverbs, which is chapter 1 through chapter 9. Here's the bookend verse to that. Verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We saw that verse first in Proverbs 1, verse 7. Now it's coming back to kind of conclude this opening to the Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and the years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you alone will bear it. That last verse is interesting. It kind of concludes this section here where it starts out and says, hey, this takes time. This is a lifelong commitment. This is a character thing. This is a virtue thing. You don't just land on a destiny because of one choice. It's a lifetime of choices. And that last verse really drives home this idea that we have responsibility, that we have freedom as individuals and responsibility in our choices. If you are wise for who? Everyone? You're wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you alone will bear it. All right, now let's pick up the second half. Well, let's take a second, do our self-examination. Which are we? Are we struggling with scoffing? Are we struggling with a cynical spirit? Are we struggling with a place where we've really begun to doubt the truth of the word? Or are we willing to be corrected? Are we willing to step back from our pride and see the message of the word of God? Let's go on. Trying to keep this a micro message, but I'm looking at my time and it is not going to be micro. All right, here we go. Last 6 verses. The woman of folly is boisterous. She is naive. She knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house, on the seat by the high places of the city. Do you see the similarities? Do you see the symmetry, the mirror images? She is not prepared like the woman, or like Lady Wisdom. She is not. She's not in a palace with 7 pillars, but she is She is positioning herself on the high places. She's sitting, she's reclined, and she's calling out to those who pass by, who make their paths straight. And she says almost exactly the same thing. Verse 16, whoever is naive, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks understanding, she says something different. She says this, not verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, and her guests are in the depths of Sheol. That verse 17 is so key. It's the switch, it's the change, it's the real differentiation between wisdom and folly. Because wisdom calls out, and she says, I have prepared my table. Come and eat. I have advice. I have good things to teach you. And what folly says is something that's much easier to do. She just says, hey, come over here. Stolen bread is sweet. Stolen bread is sweet. Stolen, let me read it again. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. That's a very easy thing to do. And we see that in our own lives. We have this appeal. There's like a bad boy appeal, James Dean and the Rebel Without a Cause, and later, generation Marlon Brando. And we have anti-heroes galore in our time that Hollywood has given us. But the original example of this is actually St. Augustine. And in his book, Confessions, it's probably the most famous passage in that whole book. He tells this story about when he was a young man and he was beginning to really engage with his sin desire, beginning to explore like sexual sin. He had this episode that kind of was a metaphor for him for the rest of his life, where he and some buddies went and stole a bunch of pears. And later, as a later saved man, he looked back on that experience and recognized, I didn't find enjoyment in that because the pears were beautiful, or because they tasted good, or because I was hungry. But that I actually, the sin thing that he recognized inside of himself was that he just did it to be bad. He just did it because of the appeal of doing something that was wrong. And he says it this way, actually, in his book, Confessions. Those pears truly were pleasant to the sight, but it was not them that my miserable soul lusted for. For I had an abundance of better, but those I plucked simply that I might steal. I plucked them and I threw them away, my sole gratification in them being my own sin, which I pleased to enjoy. That is Lady Folly's cry. And where it leads is exactly antithetical to what Lady Wisdom offered. Lady Wisdom came and she said, hey, I want you to forsake folly and live. And what we see in verse 18 is exactly the opposite. But he does not know, the fool does not know, the simple, the naive does not know that the dead are there. That word dead actually is a tricky word to translate. Dead it's as close as we can get, but you could almost say like ghosts or shades or the undead are there. The walking dead. Her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Lady Folly is inviting you to death. What's really interesting is that the decision that we have in front of us in our lives is really a choice between life and death. If you flip back a couple chapters to chapter 5, the last couple verses of chapter 5 have this exact same conclusion, or very similar conclusion. Verse 21, for the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. His own iniquities will capture the wicked. He will be held with the cords of his sin. He will die for the lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly, he will go astray. What's really interesting about that passage is it first talks about he will die, and then it says he will go astray. And the idea that that is suggesting is that you can actually die before you are physically dead. Like, how can you die and then go astray? That isn't sequentially correct. Unless the path of folly is a living hell, is a perpetual sort of dying until the ultimate death. And I think that's really what the book of Proverbs is getting at. When we choose to follow Lady Wisdom, it is steps every single day in the path of life. But when we choose Lady Folly, it is perpetual steps towards death, and we are moving in a direction that will ultimately, it's going to be hell on earth. Flip over back to chapter 8, same kind of thing happening at the conclusion of this chapter, verse 35. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me injures himself, and all those who hate me love death. We've gone through this series. I'll play my cards in large part because I have kids, and I want my kids, in the same way that Proverbs is aimed at sons and daughters, there's continual reminders, calls out to the father is calling out to his children, hey, if you want life, follow Lady Wisdom. But the truth also is that it is a lifelong pursuit. And for some of you, you may be just stepping onto that path and making that decision. And for some of you, you may have been on the path with Lady Wisdom for a long, long time. And for some of you, you may be waffling. Somebody has said that there is no such thing as status in your life. You can't go static. You're either improving or you are dying. You are living or you are dying. There is no middle ground. And some of you may be at a crossroads where you are thinking to yourself, Lady Folly looks, that stolen water looks pretty sweet. That bread that is consumed in secret looks pretty good. Lady Wisdom is crying out to you. She is in the middle of the city. She is on the highest of high places, calling out your name and saying, come and live. Or will you listen to Lady Folly? Her rival feast, her this woman who cries out, and instead of having something prepared, just says, hey, we'll wing it, man. We're going to have a good time. We'll show up somewhere. There'll be something good going on. That is the call. That is the cry. Take that self-examination and choose life. Choose to live. Amen.